from Washington, D.C.
Tonight, the long end tantrum. The 30-year Treasury yield soaring to its highest in almost 20 years, sending stocks sharply lower as the Federal Reserve leaves rates unchanged. A stark sign that investors remain unconvinced that inflation is coming under control, even as Chair Kevin Warsh reiterates the Fed's commitment to its 2% target. And tech stress tests, the Fed-driven sell-off pushing the NASDAQ into correction territory, just as investors digest sharply contrasting results from two of big tech's biggest names. Meta falling after issuing softer than expected sales guidance and raising the bottom of its CapEx forecast, while Microsoft climbs after hours with stronger than expected results. Bloomberg Tech's Ed Ludlow is standing by with a lot more. Plus, another round. President Trump signaling another imminent wave of strikes against Iran as Saudi Arabia enters the war with strikes against Iranian proxies in Iraq. Continued disruption to oil flows, pushing energy prices higher and reinforcing the inflation concerns reverberating through markets. We'll discuss the backdrop with Louisiana Senator John Kennedy in just a moment. From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew, alongside Kaylee Lyons.
And Joe, we kick off our coverage tonight with the markets. Long end bond yield soaring to the highest since 2007 after the Fed decision and amid a spike in oil prices, with a drop in stocks sending the NASDAQ 100 into correction territory. For the recap, we turn now to Power Moves with Bloomberg's Nora Melinda, who joins live from World Headquarters in New York. And Nora, quite a day.
A tough day on Wall Street. We saw the S&P 500 lower by about 1.5%. But where we really saw major losses, that was the NASDAQ 100. Those tech stocks really weighing on the market. We saw the NASDAQ 100 plunging into correction territory. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lower by about 2.2%. We got a lot of earnings, some big tech companies after the closing bell that you're seeing the market still continuing to digest. Earnings out of Meta Platforms pushing the stock to the downside in the after hours trade. That comes after revenue disappointed. Those concerns continuing to linger about AI spending. And so we know that Meta continues to spend hundreds of billions of dollars to compete against some of its American rivals like Alphabet, OpenAI, Anthropic. On the upside, though, we see Microsoft higher in the after-hours trade. Its cloud unit growing at its fastest pace in 4 years. We did see also that Azure sales topped $100 billion for the first time during the fiscal year ending in June. And then CapEx increasing by about 70% to $41 billion in the quarter. Lastly, looking at the stocks in the big tech space, Qualcomm reporting a weak profit forecast for the current quarter, and that essentially due to component shortages as well as rising costs. But of course, today was also Fed Day. We've been seeing all of this playing out in the market, the bond market in particular, after the Federal Reserve held rates steady once again.
Nora, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Nora Melinda leading the program tonight for good reason. Let's bring you inside today's Fed meeting now. The FOMC voting 9-3 in favor of keeping rates steady after a family fight, as the chairman would call it, saw Fed Presidents Lori Logan, Neil Kashkari, Beth Hammack dissenting in their call for raising rates by 25 basis points. Warsh commenting on the Fed's decision this afternoon.
The economy is showing impressive resilience. Even with recent shocks, the trends are positive and reveal solid growth. Job gains have kept pace with the workforce, and the unemployment rate has changed little. Inflation remains elevated relative to the committee's 2% goal. The committee remains resolute. You've heard this before, but we will deliver price stability.
Joining us now for more, Bloomberg's Michael McKee, who, of course, was in the room for the Fed chair's comments today in the news conference. It's always good to have you in Washington. Where did he go wrong?
He didn't answer the question, the basic question of why did you do nothing today? That's what the market wanted to know, because give them an idea of how they're thinking about inflation. It could be that the Fed is thinking our current stance of monetary policy is enough. When we look out into the future and see what's happening with oil prices, they're not so bad at the moment. Maybe we think inflation's going to go down. He could have said we just don't have the votes, but we're probably going to be talking about it in September, which he wouldn't want to do because he doesn't want to give forward guidance. But he did nothing. He basically just repeated over and over again that they want to bring it down to target without saying anything about how or when they're going to do that.
Could he be saving that for Jackson Hole?
It doesn't look like the markets are going to be that patient. And He was asked about Jackson Hole, and he said hasn't decided, but he might do a big speech about what's going to happen. But that would be forward guidance. So it's hard to think that's actually the place to look.
All right, Bloomberg's Michael McKee covering what was a doozy, ultimately, even if we didn't learn that much from the chair of the Federal Reserve. Thank you so much. And for more on today's Fed decision and other subjects, joining us now live from Capitol Hill is Republican Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana. He's a member of the Senate Banking Committee as well as the Budget and Judiciary Committees. Senator, welcome to Bloomberg TV and radio. It's great to have you on Balance of Power, especially on a Fed day of all days. If the Fed didn't hike today, are you concerned that they might have to do so just ahead of the midterms?
Well, they might. I guess I'd make 2 points. Number one, let's not lose sight of the big picture. I wouldn't trade the American economy right now for any economy in the world. Not China, not Germany, not anybody in Europe, not Canada. Number two, I think the Fed didn't hike because they don't know what to do. Now, they're not going to come out in front of the American people and say, we don't know what the hell to do. But they're not clairvoyant. They have to wait for the future like everybody else. The Fed under Chairman Powell cut rates because they were worried about the labor market. Labor market's okay. It's not great, but we're not adding a ton of new jobs, but nobody's being laid off, relatively speaking. But we've got inflation. And it's caused by three things in no particular order. Number one, all this AI spending. They're spending billions of dollars. I hope those guys know what they're doing because they got to pay the money back. Number two, to a lesser extent, tariffs. When imports cost more, that contributes to inflation. But number three, the energy costs. I mean, you don't have to be Einstein's cousin to figure that out. And so they want to just watch it and wait a little bit more. And that's what I would have done. Just wait and see and get a little bit more data. But let me say this. Look, inflation's pernicious. You cannot let it get out of control. And I know the Fed supposedly has a dual role, inflation, price stability, and full employment. But its main role is inflation. And they're going to have to, if we don't get control of it, they're going to have to raise rates. Now, I'm not saying that's going to make me happy, but they can't let this inflation get out of control.
A lot of folks thought he would hike, that the Fed would hike rates today. I can't imagine what the market would have done in that world. Senator, what do you make of the performance today? Could he have communicated things differently? Because this market reaction is visceral. You've got a 30-year at 5.2%. I'm kind of scared to think of what's going to happen tomorrow morning.
Well, let me say it again. The people at the Fed are not clairvoyant. They have to wait on the future like the rest of us. Number two, I don't want to overstate this, but sometimes the economists at the Fed remind me of those late-night psychic hotlines that you see on TV. I mean, they're about as accurate because they just don't know. But the chairman can't come out today and say, hell if I know. You know, we know inflation's a problem, but we're not sure if it's going to come down because we're not sure about what's going to happen in Iran. But that's the truth. That's what's going on.
Well, on the subject of Iran, Senator, as I'm sure you well know, President Trump is threatening to retaliate against Iran after what the U.S. described as a surprise attempted attack on U.S. assets in Jordan. If we're responding to Iranian attacks, as CENTCOM said was the case in the previous 12 days of strikes we're just coming off of, is the U.S. really in control in this theater?
Well, I've been very supportive of what President Trump has done in Iran. I think it was something we had to do. That's point one. Point two, there are limits to American air power. I don't have the intelligence that the president has, so I don't know about the additional strikes. But I think the two most effective things we can do right now to get Iran to behave is, number one, the sanctions on its sale of oil, and number two, that blockade. I think we're just going to have to starve them out. Now, that's going to be painful, because energy prices could go even higher. And nobody wants that. I don't want that. But we can't, our credibility is at stake, and Iran is dangerous, and we have to do something about it. I don't support putting troops on the ground, and I'm not convinced, but again, I don't have the information, that all these extra strikes are doing any good. But I know one thing, that blockade, if you leave it on long enough, Iran's going to have to start shutting down its wells, because it's got no place to put its oil. And once Iran shuts down those old wells, they may not be able to get them going again. And I would, if we can stay the course a few more months, I think Iran will be easier, not easy, but easier to deal with. But you also have to remember that you're dealing with the son of Sam or Charles Manson. These people are not just mildly insane.
Well, that's why you have the chorus of, call them Iran hawks, who say, let's not play around at the negotiating table. We need to finish the job militarily, Senator. I know you're paying a little less than the national average in Louisiana. It's $368, according to AAA. But if there's a few more months of this, that puts us smack dab right around Election Day, right? What does that mean for the midterms?
Well, it'll be painful as hell. But number two, you can't always, look, I'm mindful this place is political as hell. Politics is in the blood of everybody here, kind of like herpes. Yeah. Not me. I mean, I think sometimes you've got to try to do the right thing. And I wish the president and his team could do a little better job of messaging about why we're in Iran and why we're staying the course. But he's the president and I'm not.
Well, the president, of course, wants people around him that are of his selection when it comes to his cabinet. And he has told you and your colleagues on the Judiciary Committee in the United States Senate that he would like Todd Blanche to go from acting to the Attorney General of the United States. To your knowledge, Senator, will you be voting on his confirmation in the committee tomorrow? What is the status?
Well, if I'm called to vote, I'm going to vote yes. And I'll be glad to explain why if you care to hear it.
Do you expect to be called to vote?
I don't know if we're going to have a vote. John Cornyn has requested the paperwork to resolve this issue of the anti-weaponization fund. John's a good senator. I know him well. He's serious as an aneurysm about this. He's not going to back down. And if I were Mr. Blanche, I would give Cornyn what he wants. If he doesn't, he's not going to be confirmed. I'm not saying I agree with Senator Cornyn, but I know Senator Cornyn, and he's not backing down. So that's where we are.
Yeah.
If I had to bet, I'd say we're not voting.
Wow. Well, this is quite a moment we're in, Senator, and I understand that when you're not in Washington, you're a substitute teacher at McKinley Magnet Middle School, teaching government and civics to public school students. Talk to us like your class for a moment.
Well,
is the system working? Is this going well, Senator?
I've been doing this for 15 years, and I substitute teach. I try to do it 3 times a year. We need substitutes badly. They'll even take politicians. You ought to do it, and it'd be a real substitute.
What's your civics lesson, Professor? How is the system working right now?
Well, every school's different. If you're lucky,
I mean Washington.
I'm sorry?
I mean Washington.
Well, I'm not going to tell the kids this, but right now, as we were talking off the air, this place is a total cock-up, as they say in England. It looks like the happy hour at an airport Chili's. There is no plan right now. I say that gently, but there is no plan. The president wants one thing. Our majority leader, who I support, wants another. Only the majority leader can put a bill on the floor. If it were up to me, I'd do it differently. I would put, there's this mantra of we've got to work it out with the Democrats and we've all got to be happy. look, that's where God made votes. You're not going to make everybody happy. And I'd vote on the budget resolution. I'd call a vote on the Iran sanctions bill, the final vote. I'd vote on a clean CR. If Senator Schumer wants to shut government down, he can vote no on a clean CR. I would vote on the FISA renewal. I'd vote on all of our pending business, and I'm prepared to stay as long as we have to. If that means missing the August break, so be it. We ought to get our work done. But for 6 months, I've been in meeting after meeting after meeting that could have been an email to discuss these bills and who's happy and who's sad and what are my Democratic friends going to do. At some point, you got to vote. And we're not doing nearly enough voting and way too much talking. In Louisiana, we'd say we're doing a lot of chopping, but no chips are flying.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'd love to meet you in that classroom someday. I want to hear what you're saying to the students, and I'm sure you'd love to get back to Catahoula as soon as you can.
These kids are great. These kids are great.
I believe
I learn something every time I do it.
Well, we're glad to have you, Senator. We've been looking forward to this for longer than you know, and I hope this won't be the last opportunity.
No, let's do it again.
John Kennedy of Louisiana. Thank you for being with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Great pleasure. President Trump's threats to hit Iran hard following yesterday's attack that targeted U.S. forces in Jordan sent oil surging anew today, with Brent topping $90 a barrel. We spoke about that and more with Energy Secretary Chris Wright. Asked him how high prices will go if the diplomatic path with Iran fails and the U.S. returns to military action.
Well, if there's military action, it's relatively brief. We are using the United States military today to escort out oil and natural gas out of the Strait of Hormuz. That actually has gone remarkably well. Little reported in the news, and probably that's because we don't talk about it too much. But we are restoring supplies of global oil and refined products to the world out of that region, independent of
how much supply, sir? Do you have an updated number for us in terms of how much is actually getting through the strait?
So a 7-day trailing average right now out of the Arabian Gulf region is 13 million barrels a day. About half of that flowing through the strait and half of that through bypass pipelines. So we're about 2/3 of the delivery of oil out of the Arabian Gulf region as we were before the conflict started.
That's really great information, Mr. Secretary. And I wonder your thoughts on what is now the involvement of Houthi rebels from Yemen, creating a potential second choke point, as we've discussed, in the Red Sea. This is something that Saudi Arabia had already tried to pipeline around with regard to the Strait of Hormuz. Is there a bypass to the bypass, as Javier Blas put that you're talking to Saudi Arabia about, where additional pipe could be installed to get around this second choke point?
There is a bypass to the bypass called the Suez Canal. So you can go across to the Red Sea, and instead of going south down to the Bab el-Mandeb, you can go through the Suez Canal. That is happening as we speak. There's both oil tanker capacity through the Suez, and there is a pipeline that follows the same route, both of which will be employed to divert more oil that way.
You can watch the rest of our interview with Secretary Wright on the terminal or online. And still ahead here, Meta and Microsoft earnings came in after the bell. They're going in two different directions in the after-hours trade. We'll have the latest with Bloomberg Tech's Ed Ludlow next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons. Meta shares are plunging after the bell on a disappointing revenue forecast and a lifting of the low end of its CapEx guidance. Meantime, Microsoft is faring slightly better post-market, reporting that its cloud unit grew at the fastest pace in 4 years. For the details now, we turn to Bloomberg Tech anchor Ed Ludlow, who has more from our San Francisco bureau. So, Ed, if we could begin with Meta, because that is the more outsized reaction post-market. Shares down about 10% now. Is it really about the revenue, or are we still concerned here about spending?
So spending, yes. I mean, they did lower the lower end of the capex guide, but there's no forward-looking signal yet. The one point of emphasis is that operating margins were impacted in the quarter by two one-time charges. One related to severance. You guys know the story about the rounds of Meta layoffs. We've discussed it here on Balance of Power. And then the other one was a one-time legal charge. And essentially, what the company is saying, if it were not for those one-time charges, then in the quarter, their operating income would have increased 9% year on year. The story here of Meta is very common to the other tech earnings we've had in recent quarters. Free cash flow is at its lowest level in a long time. As they transition to being an AI company, all of the spending that's happening is impacting free cash flow. And so we wait for more guidance, I guess, on CapEx going forward.
Really interesting. If we can turn to Microsoft here, both of these are broken charts going into earnings. Ed, they've been beaten down ahead of these reports. But Microsoft is looking pretty good, levitating in after-hours trading. But the story doesn't end there yet, does it?
Yeah, so Azure, which is its cloud computing unit, grew at 43% year on year. And that is a good number. It's the fastest growth rate since 2022. On the capital expenditures side, we're still waiting for the big one. The earnings call doesn't start until 5:30 p.m. Eastern time. But the expectation is that having closed their fiscal year 26, Microsoft will tell us something about their spending plans going forward. And so that's the math. They have 43% top-line growth in cloud computing. That's the indicator of AI success. Will the CapEx growth exceed that pace going into next year? And a lot of the street thinks they will.
I guess the part I don't understand is when investors get upset about CapEx going up too high, it doesn't tend to always benefit, at least not lately, the data center infrastructure companies, the Microns of the world that are getting all of that money, or the NVIDIAs that are going to sell the hardware to the hyperscalers. Does that disconnect continue through earnings season?
Well, right now, short term, there's a piece on the Bloomberg about how the chips aren't getting any benefit because there's no tangible, absolutely clear evidence CapEx will go up. We're waiting for the companies to say it. But longer term, it's about durability. The story's really shifted from being, we will reward higher CapEx at any cost. Just go for it. Spend more money on AI. To now wanting real evidence that these companies are getting a return on that. And that it's not just top-line growth. They want to say, like, here's the AI products we have. With everyday Americans and people around the world, here are some data points that evidence it's actually getting used. The burden's a lot higher. So in Microsoft's case, it wasn't just Azure. There were other data points that Copilot and other AI initiatives are going well, but it's still the missing piece is the CapEx information. Simply, is CapEx growing faster than all of the traction of your AI offering is? And we'll find out probably in the course of the next hour.
Well, and in our final minute with you, Ed, at this time tomorrow, we'll be talking through Apple and Amazon results. Is it also a CapEx story, at least for the latter?
Well, with Amazon, it's highly analogous. And with Apple, they've been the outliers. So Joe mentioned like Microsoft stock underperformance, down 18% year to date. It's had a really rough start to 2026, in part because concern about their AI story and CapEx. Apple has been rewarded for being insulated from the CapEx story. The thing that's common to all of them is memory prices are very high right now. The same DRAM or memory chips that are going into smartphones are going into data centers. And so in Apple's case, how have they managed that with their suppliers? That will be a key watch.
Really great to have you. In the clutch, Ed Ludlow, we'll let you get on the call in a moment. Looking forward to your reporting here on Balance of Power. Coming up, former Republican Senator, former Ambassador to Turkey, Jeff Flake will be with us on Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We're going to be hitting them very hard because it's our turn to hit them. They know it's coming. They're asking us not to do it, but, they tried shooting it last night, so it's our turn. And we'll see if we get there with an agreement at some point, but we're going to hit them very hard.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons. And that was President Trump earlier today threatening that the U.S. will strike back at Iran after an attempted surprise attack against U.S. forces in Jordan on Tuesday. And joining us now for more live from the White House North Lawn is Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan. So, Kate, he's made the promise. Do we have any sense as to what time it will be delivered upon?
We do not yet know exactly the details of this, but as you mentioned, Trump is now promising retribution after the U.S. military said that it intercepted a surprise attack by Iran on U.S. forces in the region. And that surprise attack really shattered this brief pause in fighting. Trump had stopped attacks on Iran after conducting a 13-day bombing campaign and saying that he wanted to give diplomacy another shot after previously saying that he thought it was completely a waste of time to talk to the Iranians. Trump is now saying that the U.S. is going to be hitting back very hard after he told reporters in the Oval Office this afternoon that it's our turn. I should also note that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who met with Trump yesterday here at the White House, was also meeting with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth this morning, just hours after the surprise attack. I thought it was also interesting. Trump mentioned that he thought that the attack might have been carried out by a different faction of Iranian officials than the people that the U.S. has been dealing with in negotiations. All just underscores the confusion here, the uncertainty, and how the U.S. at this moment appears to be very far from reaching any kind of lasting peace agreement after this war has now, the war that Trump said would just last just a few weeks has now passed the 6-month mark.
Questions about President Trump's relationship with the Senate Majority Leader John Thune. I think we know how he feels about John Cornyn, but both came to a head today in the confirmation process for Todd Blanche, which apparently is going to be on ice until Cornyn gets, on paper, as he puts it, a written guarantee there'll be no anti-weaponization fund. I know the president was asked about this today. Kate, here's what he said.
Well, all I can say is Todd Blanche is outstanding, and I thought it was pretty routine because he's so good. He just wouldn't find a better person. So I don't know. Maybe John Cornyn's upset with me because I didn't endorse him. I don't know what it is, but I haven't heard that there's a problem. I heard he's going through quite nicely.
And do you think Senate Majority Leader John Thune, after the comments you heard regarding Save America and some other stuff, do you think he's still the man for the job?
Well, we're going to find out, and I'll let you know.
The president earlier today, Kate Sullivan, I guess we have a sense of what their relationship is all about. Do we have any idea if the president's on the phone with John Cornyn trying to solve this?
We do not know. What what the president was referencing there was that the president endorsed Ken Paxton in the Senate Texas primary runoff over John Cornyn and is suggesting that that is the reason Cornyn is now holding up the nomination. It's unclear whether the president and Cornyn are speaking at this moment, but what I can say is that at this moment, Cornyn's vote is really what's standing between Blanche and becoming the next attorney general. He's been serving, of course, as the acting attorney general since Pam Bondi was fired in April. But at this moment, Cornyn is a crucial swing vote, and his vote is needed to really advance this nomination. As you mentioned, Cornyn wants this written commitment that the DOJ will not revive this controversial anti-weaponization fund, this roughly $1.7 billion fund that Democrats and critics are saying could be essentially used as a slush fund for Trump's allies.
Kate, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan with us live from the White House. Joining us now, someone who's reminded why he doesn't work here all the time anymore, or maybe why he doesn't want to. Jeff Flake, the former Republican senator of Arizona, former U.S. ambassador to Turkey under President Biden, is with us in studio. Mr. Ambassador, welcome. It's great to see you today on Bloomberg. Isn't this the moment where you say, wow, I'm glad that's not my problem anymore?
Yes.
To think of the dysfunction that we're witnessing on Capitol Hill, forget the confirmation process for a moment where you can't even fund the government without a CR in August? Yeah. We're just kind of giving up here, aren't we?
Well, let me just say, to see what's going on today in the Senate just warms my heart.
It
because
does,
it's the Senate acting like the Senate should.
How's that?
With a couple of senators pushing back.
Okay.
And we haven't seen that.
You're talking about John Cornyn.
I am.
Okay.
I am. John Cornyn. And
is he on the right side of history?
He is. I spoke to him yesterday, as well as Tom Tillis, and they're dug in, as they should be. This anti-weaponization fund, as much as Todd Blanche tries to say it's dead, they'll say, well, put it in writing. And he'll say, well, why should I have to put it in writing? He's a lawyer. He should know why he has to put it in writing. Because the president still wants it alive. John Cornyn knows that. So does Tom Tillis. And John Cornyn is also concerned about this deal that gave birth to that fund, which was to shield the Trump family from prosecution by the IRS. And
John Cornyn wants to make sure that that doesn't protect them in the future for anything future. And he's wanting to get that in writing as well, or have that clarified, and it hasn't been. So, yeah, to see what's going on in the Senate, it's good. It's finally, we're seeing some pushback. And we'll likely, I think, in November, maybe see some more pushback with divided government. And so I think you're going to see a more normal Washington. What we've seen in the last couple of years has not been normal.
Yeah. Well, as you talk about the Senate operating as the Senate should, obviously the Senate operates with the filibuster still intact.
Yes.
For I guess there are exceptions to that. But for the most part, the Majority Leader John Thune has held the line on that. I wonder if you think he's going to be able to continue to do so, as we're reading so frequently about the mounting pressure that is on him, given he has not been able to deliver on so much of what President Trump has asked for.
That's right. He's doing the right thing, and he'll continue to do it, because it's not just him. It's a number of Republican senators who have a problem with getting rid of the legislative filibuster. Legislative filibuster is the best mechanism still employed in the Senate to keep the Senate being the Senate. And John Thune knows that. So do a number of other senators, more than want to admit. And so, I think he's going to be able to continue to, because it's not just John. And the president can come and yell at John Thune all he wants. John knows he doesn't have the votes for it. And I hope he never gets the votes for it, because Republicans, when we're in power, we want to get rid of the filibuster because it's a nuisance. It certainly is. Democrats want to get rid of it when they're in power. And it's good to keep it.
Will John Thune still be majority leader?
He will.
After November?
Yes, yes, he will. I mean,
even if Republicans lose the House, do you think the Senate's safe?
I think it's very difficult to see the math when the Senate turns. The House, likely so.
Well, I wonder if you expect that the House is going to be able to follow through on something that the Senate looks like it will. We saw a massive bipartisan vote yesterday on the sanctions package that was initially authored by the late Senator Lindsey Graham, whose memorial service I know you attended here in Washington yesterday. 86-12 in the Senate on the procedural vote. Looks like it's going to sail through. And I wonder if you think that's enough of a mandate for the House, where Democrats may take issue with the fact that this gives tariff power back to the president. And there's obviously some Republicans who don't necessarily think that the U.S. needs to go harder on Russia.
Well, tariff power is different than sanction power. I think they're fine with the sanction part, Republicans at least, and most Democrats. Yeah, I mean, it has bipartisan overwhelming support in the House and the Senate. So I was glad to see that move. I think economic pressure on Russia would be a good thing, more economic pressure. So, yeah, I think that will be a fitting tribute to Lindsey Graham to push that through.
As we go into the real heart of the midterm fundraising and campaign cycle here, there's a big conversation about the rift within the Democratic Party, Democratic Socialists winning some really competitive races that we've seen and kind of energizing a certain wing of the party. But there's a big argument in the Republican family as well. It's highlighted by where we started with the John Cornyns and Tom Tillis's pushing back on the MAGA movement. How does this rationalize itself through the form of elections in November?
Well, nothing, focuses the mind as much as a big election loss. And so when you go through a loss,
is that what you're in for?
I think Republicans will lose the House. Yeah. Michigan next week will be a big tell because you've seen the DSA movement, gain a couple of seats in very blue states or blue districts. This is a purple state, Michigan, and you're going to see who prevails there. I suppose if the more progressive candidate does there, he'll have a really hard time winning that general. Yeah. I know a bit about that. Arizona, we tend to nominate candidates on the Republican side who can't win the general. And so that's why in a very red state like Arizona, we have a Democratic governor, Democratic senator, Democratic attorney general, Democrat secretary of state, all the statewide offices, because that subset of a subset of MAGA voters is enough to win a primary and guarantee winning a primary, but you just can't win a general. And so, that problem is both on the right and the left, with the extremes controlling the nominating process. And unfortunately, I think the country suffers from it.
So you've answered our questions with your political and senatorial hat on. I'd like to put on the diplomatic hat for a moment as a former ambassador. As you look at the situation in the Middle East, the president pursuing diplomacy, backing off and pursuing the military option, once again opening the door to diplomatic efforts, only to have Iran surprise attempt attack on our base in Jordan. Is there a real hope for diplomacy in your mind? Is Iran an entity that can be reasoned with?
They're a lot more difficult to reason with now that they've discovered the so-called Trump card with the Strait of Hormuz. They didn't have that before. They've got it, and they don't want to get rid of it. And so we're in immeasurably a more difficult position now diplomatically than we were before. I wish the president would stop. I was glad to see him not have a press conference with Netanyahu and with Zelensky yesterday and let some diplomats do the work. I think the problem here is we don't have many seasoned diplomats doing the work. And that, I think, is showing. But even seasoned diplomats would have a hard time right now. I think there's no way we can get the Strait of Hormuz open again without more kinetic action, unfortunately, because that's the situation we're in now. We didn't have to be, but we're in that now. Certainly.
So what went through your mind this morning when you learned that Saudi Arabia had entered the war? Saudi Arabian fighter jets flying alongside Americans to strike targets in Iraq. When you close your eyes, do you envision a much wider Middle Eastern war?
I think that's going to be more difficult. One thing I thought was, I think it's less likely to expand very much. The Gulf states don't want to be in a broader war. They want stability. That's really what they crave. They feel they may have to, but I think that that's a ways away. What would be useful is to see some of our other allies get involved. And I think they'll need to, but the difficulty is the president didn't consult them before the war. He's disparaged them throughout, and he's taken every opportunity to basically tell them why they shouldn't be along our side. But we're going to need them. I mean, it's much better to have Iran versus the rest of the world than Iran versus the U.S. And it's going to be difficult to get back to that situation.
You mentioned our allies. One, of course, is Turkey, where you served as the United States ambassador. Do you have an opinion on whether or not Turkey should be allowed to have F-35s again?
I do. We have to back up a little. Turkey was a member of the F-35 program. Hundreds and hundreds of parts for the F-35 were actually manufactured in Turkey. They're really good at that. They were part of that program, but then purchased a Russian weapons system in 2019 and got kicked out of the program, which they should have been. But they already own 6 F-35s that we're storing for them. We would love to have them back in the program. It would be good for Turkey to be back in the program. They are a valuable member of NATO, but they have to get rid of the
How do you unwind
S-400?
S-400? How is it?
It's difficult, and a lot of my time as ambassador there was trying to find ways for them to do that and still save face among their population. They paid about $2 billion for an S-400 that they've not used. So that's a difficult situation. And then Russia, there's probably an air tag on that. They'll know where it goes. So that's a difficult thing. It's a very thorny political issue and difficulty, but it needs to be done. Turkey knows it has to. And this isn't just something that the president can say, all right, we're going to sell them F-35s. In the NDAA that Congress passed, and something we stick to, they said that Turkey cannot be in possession of the S-400, that Russian weapons system, and still have the F-35. And Congress, I've talked to a lot of my former colleagues recently on that. They're going to hold firm on that. And I hope they do. I hope Turkey finds a way to do it. I won't outline the various ways in which they can. Those are under discussion. But if they can, they should have the F-35.
All right. The former ambassador to Turkey and, of course, former senator from Arizona, Jeff Flake, thank you so much for joining us here in Washington, again in town for his late colleague Lindsey Graham's funeral yesterday. We'll have more Balance of Power ahead here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons, where we've had a number of important conversations this hour, including with Republican Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana. who told us he's not sure if his Judiciary Committee is going to be voting on the confirmation of Todd Blanche to be the next Attorney General tomorrow or anytime soon, so long as his colleague, Senator John Cornyn, is holding out over the Anti-Weaponization Fund. And joining us now for more on that is this evening's political panel, Democratic strategist Adam Hodge, managing director at Bully Pulpit International, alongside Republican strategist John Seaton, the founder and CEO of Echo Canyon Consulting. Welcome to you both. John, to begin with you, Senator Kennedy told us if he were Mr. Blanche, he would do what Cornyn wants. Otherwise, he is not going to be confirmed. And I wonder if you too believe it is that simple and Senator Cornyn is not going to be willing to fold on this one.
I think it is, and at the end of the day, Senator Cornyn is now a lame duck. He has no more elections to fight, so he can kind of do what he wants. I'm guessing that's kind of freeing for him, and so I do think that he holds a lot of cards right now, and at the end of the day, they've got to be able to count to 50 votes plus the vice president in order to get Mr. Blanche confirmed. So, yeah, I think that the best course of action is to kind of cede the point to Senator Cornyn, give him what he wants, and that should kind of grease the skids to get him through the Senate.
So chicken's coming home to roost here a little bit for Donald Trump, right? I mean, he's going to have to deal with this, even if this is solved, for the rest of this Congress. Cornyn, Tillis, Cassidy. Does this make it less likely for anything else to get passed?
Well, I think the three men you just mentioned do want to leave having gotten things done. They're not just there to vote no on things. They're still conservative Republicans. Yeah. But, yeah, they have a lot less of a reason to just roll over every time the president asks for something. In fact, they have no reason to do that. So I do think that they're going to they do want to leave having accomplished something, but they're going to do it on their terms. Yeah.
Well, we know those three men will not be serving in the United States Senate for much longer. They're lame ducks, as John mentioned. Adam, my question is more those who are trying not to become lame ducks, who want to win their reelection in November, the likes of Susan Collins, for example, or Dan Sullivan, who may be grappling with how to handle what the president wants versus what they feel like they may pay for at the polls in November, especially in light of the new Quinnipiac poll that just came out that shows a 32% approval rating for Trump, an approval rating that, frankly, is just going lower. Does that give more senators more leeway to break from the president if he's becoming increasingly unpopular?
Well, it should, Kayleigh. It should give them a little bit more courage. But I'm old enough, I've been around to the block a little bit, where Republicans almost always, they come home when they get the call from dad. They always do what dad wants them to do. And I think you're going to see them, whether it's on another reconciliation package potentially, or on some of the funding for the war in Iran, or some of these other votes like for Todd Blanche. They're eventually going to come home and do what the president asked them to, because they don't want to get the base riled up. And they know that you can't have it both ways. If you truly go against the president, you lose the base of the party. And I think all of this speaks to brightening hopes for Democrats of taking back the Senate. What you were just hearing from Jeff Flake thinks is unlikely. I'm more bullish on the Democrats winning the Senate than I've ever been in places like Alaska, Iowa, Nebraska even. And sure, I think Maine is still competitive. When the president is that unpopular, he drags down the party. We learned that ourselves as a Democrats in 2024. And there were winnable races that we didn't win because the president at the top of the ticket was pretty unpopular. I think the same is going to be true for Republicans, and that's why I think now more than ever, a Democratic majority in the Senate is more likely.
Got higher oil prices today. Gas prices are probably going to follow. We talked this out with Senator Kennedy, who said this could be a real issue around midterm elections. When you hear the president today on Fox, speaking with Fox, saying we're going to blast the effing S out of them, does that give you hope for energy prices in the near term here? And you've managed campaigns. What do you do with a candidate in the middle of this?
In the middle of it, yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously a challenge, and to the extent that you can pivot into your areas of strength, but you do have to also make sure the voters know that you hear their concerns. And I think that we saw this with the Biden White House, and frankly, we're seeing it some with this White House, is that there's not an acknowledgement. Look, we understand that you're paying more for gas. We understand that you're paying more for your groceries. We have a concrete plan to do something about it, and send me to Congress, and I'm going to fight to bring those prices down. And so I think that's the challenge for any incumbent Republican right now, is to try to make that case that I hear you, as Bill Clinton, I think, said, I feel your pain, and we're going to do everything we can to fight every day to bring prices down. That's clearly what's on voters' minds right now.
And yet further retaliation against Iran may not bring prices down in the short term. In fact, today, at least, Adam, it had the very opposite effect. With your former NSC hat on, what do you expect a hard response against Iran to look like after we've already seen so many targets hit, retaliation for previous strikes in and around the Strait of Hormuz? What could the hardest blow look like in actuality?
Well, certainly the president is talking to his team about using the most aggressive and the most effective, bombs that we could put on the table, obviously short of hopefully a nuclear weapon. I don't think that's actually on the table. But I think the question for the president, like, how does he get out of this quicksand that he's found himself in? He's boxed himself in. There's no real path for diplomacy because the people that would do that negotiating aren't empowered to actually reach a bigger deal. Iran knows that they've got the sort of seal of approval on anything that ultimately moves through the Strait of Hormuz in the long term. Because they're not going anywhere. It's their country. And so I think what we're faced with is longer periods of higher prices for the foreseeable future. Before this war started, oil was about $58 a gallon. We're not going back there anytime soon. I think that means higher gas prices for American people. That means higher diesel prices, higher prices for chemical goods. That all feeds to higher prices over the long term. And that's why I think what you saw from the Fed and some of the dissenting votes today makes it even more likely that we have higher rates coming from the Fed, because I just don't think the fundamentals within the economy are going to demand a more aggressive response to tackle higher prices because of this war that the president started.
Of course, that's not going to be music to any campaign's ears. Certainly a Republican campaign. Just quickly, John, in our remaining moment or so, there's another War Powers vote that's coming in the next few hours here. There's one here, I believe, from Kirsten Gillibrand. Are we going to see more Republicans break ranks on this if we go through another 60-day mark, if prices keep rising?
I'm not sure. I still think Republicans are united in supporting the president and this effort in Iran. What that ends up actually looking like, I think, remains to be seen. Of course, I think when I was here last time, I think it's incumbent upon the president and the party to continue to make the case to the American people why it's so important, why we need to finish the job. So I wouldn't expect too many more defections. But, I think the concern with prices is a real one, and I think you're seeing that in the polls.
Yeah. Well, and you're seeing that in the Federal Reserve commentaries. Adam, in our final minute, you mentioned the Fed and the inflationary problem from higher oil prices. Do you really believe the Fed is going to be able to hike rates just ahead of the midterm elections?
I think they have no choice, Kaylee. And again, I come back to this was entirely of the president's own making. And so if that is where the Fed ends up doing, if we see another spike in the PPI and CPI in 2 weeks' time, I don't see how they don't act. How there isn't a broader stampede for higher rates from the Fed. And Kevin Warsh doesn't want to lose that vote at the board. So I think, unfortunately, the president has boxed his own Fed pick in with this war in the Middle East. And unless he finds a way to get out of this hole, that's where we're headed.
All right, Adam Hodge and John Seaton, thank you both so much for joining us on this Fed Day and busy day in Washington, which you can always find more coverage of in the Washington Edition newsletter, on the terminal, and online.
Catch you back here tomorrow on Bloomberg TV and radio.